Hello. Hi, everyone, and welcome to a reprise of the first webcast of the Immersive Arts Alliance. Immersive Arts Alliance is a newly formed San Francisco-based nonprofit. It supports collaboration between international and local artists working with new media technologies, partners with Bay Area venues and arts organizations to create large-scale visionary projects that champion the emerging practice of experiential and immersive art. Today will be a conversation between the three of us. My name is Vanessa Chang, and I'm a curator, writer, and educator in the Bay Area, working in new media art. Clark Suprinovich has been active in the San Francisco Bay Area since the 1980s as a composer, educator, and arts entrepreneur. He's the founder and CEO of Future Fires, an artist agency for the digital arts, and he's also the executive and creative director of Immersive Arts Alliance. Today will be a talk and discussion with me, John, and Clark, and then a Q&A. So if anything comes up during the conversation or the talk that you'd like to ask, please feel free to write your questions into the Q&A function. With that, I'd like to introduce John. Can Buyukberber is a visual artist working on immersive audiovisual experiences, blurring boundaries between physical and digital spaces. His practice consists of experiments with virtual and augmented reality, projection mapping, geodesic domes, large-scale displays, and digital fabrication. He's driven by an interdisciplinary thinking, which extends to art, design, and science. His work focuses on human perception and explores new methods for nonlinear narratives and emergent forms. He received his master's degree in art and technology here in San Francisco at the San Francisco Art Institute as a Fulbright scholar, and he's been selected to Autodesk's Pier 9 and Adobe's AR artist residencies, and he's exhibited at museums, galleries, and media art festivals around the world.
Thank you, Vanessa. Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for your invitation, Clark and Vanessa. Happy to be with you again. Should I continue with my little presentation?
Please do.
That'd be great. Yeah, maybe I'll just say very quickly, parenthetically, that John, as Vanessa just pointed out, was in the Bay Area at SFAI and other residencies he did here, is now sheltering in place in Izmir, Turkey, and has plans to return to the Bay Area once it's safe to do so. And we have a large project planned to, with John in Oakland, which we can talk about a bit later in the hour.
Yep. Yeah, I'm in my hometown right now in Turkey. So let me try to share my screen. I guess you should be able to see it now, right?
Yep.
Cool. Okay. So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for watching. Like Vanessa said, I've been working with digital media and media arts for a while now. And this is actually a presentation I prepared for a talk before. It's an hour and plus, but I'm trying to just condense it under 20 minutes here without the videos. But if you're interested in any of these works specifically, you can check out my website or social media accounts. The links are here for the videos. So computers and digital media became a tool for me since I was in high school. I was always interested in art, design, and filmmaking. And once I discovered creative softwares, this digital realm became a studio for me to produce art, to expand my creativity using these tools. And I've been creating mostly installation work using architecture and space and domes and different physical and digital environments to produce experiences that utilizes abstract universes and audio experiences and non-narrative abstract narratives. I studied design in Istanbul. It's where I am now. I'm in Turkey. This is my home country. Before moving to United States, I've been studying visual communication design at Istanbul Bilgi University, where I was introduced to global media art scene. This museum you see here, it was a beautiful contemporary art museum where students were working and throwing these innovative exhibitions. And that's when I decided, okay, like I can use these tools and express my ideas, and I can make a living by doing that. So I did different experiments, and when I was in Istanbul, I was working there during those design study years as an art director for different types of like music videos and commercials and immersive installation work. Then I decided to produce more personal work and follow artistic career. So I spent some time in nature, because Istanbul, just like New York, was a super crowded city, and I just wanted to remove myself from the computer world for a while. And I went back to traditional, tools and illustration work and creating sculptures with, natural materials and stuff. And that time that I spent, this was like a small 3-4 month residency in Bodrum, gave me a lot of like personal concepts and ideas to pursue. So these are some of those illustration work I produced. I was somehow, mimicking computer algorithms with my hand to produce this complex patterns. And then that time that I spent with these traditional tools later reflected itself in my digital work as well, in terms of composition and form and concepts. There are a few different parts in this presentation. This first part is about projection mapping projects that I've been producing. This became an interest for me during my design study years. I was super interested in using computer animation and 3D tools, but I was mostly doing screen-based work. So these kind of technologies like projection mapping allowed me to bring those digital ideas into physical spaces. And at the time, and still there is a big interest, especially in Europe, in these type of like light art festivals, projection mapping art festivals, and artists like me can present these type of public innovative artworks. This was a project in Signal Festival called Emerge. This was one of my first pieces I showed in public in this scale. And the audience reaction just gave me a lot of ideas to how to approach to my audiovisual experiences. This is another collaboration with Signal Productions in Czech Republic. This was a symphony concert, a big audiovisual collaboration between 12 different digital artists and a Czech Philharmonic Symphony Orchestra. And this was also another innovative experiment of how classical artistic performances can have this kind of collaborations with innovative digital artists to produce these very immersive spatial sensory experiences. This was super fascinating to work with. Later in 2015, I moved to San Francisco. And I started to produce, when I was at SFAI, we had this beautiful studio environment. I started to produce more gallery size works using similar type of approaches I did in projection mapping, but this time I wanted to generate, instead of working with architecture, a pre-existing form. I wanted to produce my own sculptural ideas using digital fabrication tools and different types of light installations. So these are some of the results of those processes. This was a project, this was our collaboration with Clark and Bright Light in the first feature fire show Luminary. We've created this wall mural basically with tapes. This form was generated with computer. Then by using projection techniques, we projected this form and traced it with tapes with my collaborator Yağmur, and then I prepared this animated content on that form, which allowed us to add volume and time-based narration on this abstract form, and it was somehow looking like it has a real physical presence in the space, and I guess it was also well received by the audiences of Luminary. So after doing these type of different sizes, utilizing projection mapping techniques and for immersive experiences, later I became very interested in domes and virtual reality, because basically when you utilize these 360 environments, we are able to put the audiences in a completely immersed journey in these digital environments. And dome and virtual reality is a very similar approach in terms of content creation. And I was able to showcase my audiovisual works that I produced for these media in different settings, which I'm going to show in a bit. So this is a biosphere in Montreal. It was built by architect Buckminster Fuller. And here we see Allegra Fuller, his daughter, who was also a UCLA scholar. I was visiting here with my friends from Turkey in 2015, and we presented this piece, and I was just being in this biosphere. I was fascinated by at the opening of Immersion Experience Symposium of SAT. I was super inspired by Allegra Fuller's speech about her father and how he was inspired by nature to create these amazing geometrical formations, and his concepts of spaceship Earth and synergetics, and the concept of world game. It was just super inspiring content for me during my master's studies. So Fuller's ideas combined with dome projection techniques, and this book, Expanded Cinema by Gene Youngblood, and the foreword was also by Buckminster Fuller, became a very powerful research material for my to build my immersive experiences. And the book was especially very fascinated. It was written in 1970, but Gene was really describing the era we're living in now. He was mentioning the end of drama. He was mentioning of holographic audiovisual experiences of the future, and how these new works, the expanded cinema works, is going to be more about the sensory experience and the marriage of cinematic and sound arts, but less about the drama of the traditional narrative structure. So this project called Morphogenesis was my first audiovisual work that I produced for domes and VRs, and I was very inspired by Buckminster Fuller and this idea, the concept of morphogenesis, which literally means the beginning of the shape. I can see parallels with this concept in like how we produce stuff out of nothing in digital media, or how the universe works basically and generates structure by following certain geometrical patterns and formulas. And this was that journey through these increasingly complexifying spaces and sounds. And at the time, especially in the Bay Area and in general California, there was a big interest in VR art and VR works, but there was not many VR specifically artworks, since it is kind of hard to dive into this world, since there is a lot of like technical stuff you need to get through, and also it is a completely new media, so it's not also easy to find your aesthetics and voice in that space. But I was experienced in that projection work, and I was already working with architecture, so I was kind of prepared in terms of aesthetics and concepts and how to work with spaces. So we received a really nice feedback for this work, and it became one of my most exhibited pieces around the world, since it was utilizing the same content, was utilizing different types of media like this geodesic domes and VR tools, and also these kind of panoramic displays. So it was really a great experiment for me to understand how audiences are reacting to these kind of experiences, also in terms of allowing me to distribute my work around the world online, you know, with festivals and galleries, and it just opened so many different collaborations for me. um, this is another work with Obscura Digital that I've worked for a while as an art director, and I had a chance to work with their super cool team for these kind of large scale projects. This was another dome, external dome piece, which they're completely working on right now. They're building a giant dome arena in Las Vegas for like 15, 20,000 audiences. You know, it's going to be a huge space. So this was a brief launching event installation for that. So it was also very cool to work with the exterior structure of the domes. So I love domes basically. And in the next experiment for me was, after becoming super interested in this media, I wanted to build more interactive virtual reality installations by bringing more physical ideas into them. So I had this opportunity to work at Pier 9 Artist Residency of Autodesk, where they have amazing machinery, CNC tools, 3D printers, laser cutters, and so on. And at the time, I was also working for my grad show. This is a room at San Francisco Mint. I was thinking about this concept of reality, virtuality continuum, where the physical world ends and where the virtual world starts, or vice versa. So I wanted to build a physical installation where anyone can experience when they enter the space, and then later when they put the headset on, they are in a different digital enhanced version of that exhibition basically. And these are some pre-visualizations from that, and these are some of the sculptural ideas inspired by the concepts in morphogenesis, again building these hybrid forms of like organic and digital form ideas. These are some space ideas based on particle simulations. So these are the results of that 3D printing sculptural experiments that I worked on. We talked about this before. I call these transcendental objects. I'm very fascinated by higher dimensional geometry, which is proven mathematically, and it is a very inspiring space for artists like me to just imagine how would four-dimensional space look like or feel like, or how the perception would work in that space. So even though we can't really comprehend, we have mathematical projections of those four-dimensional geometries and 3D and 2D projections. So these were inspired by those mathematics. This is how it looked like. I placed sensors in those objects, which I have one of those with me. This is a Vive tracker. So this tracker, when it's put on an object, and if you have a 3D model of that object, in this case I have, because I produce everything in digital space. So this was able to be perceived in the digital environment. So people were able to have physical reactions, physical interactions with these objects, and these objects were becoming spaces around them. Later, I was playing with that sense of scale in digital and physical spaces. So it was yes, please.
Could just turn off your screen sharing for one moment so people can see that object that you were just holding?
Sure, yeah.
I need to see that.
So here it is.
Lovely.
Thank you. I'm going back. Another approach here was I was also trying to bring a different approach to how to exhibit VR works, because most of the time in galleries, these headsets are highlighted. You know, you see the tech, but you don't necessarily see how the art works or what is it like. So and also this is a whole different conversation now, like after this moment, how we're gonna approach to these headsets and shared experiences like that. But um, I was also concerned with the lines we had in the gallery space, because a lot of people can't experience the thing at the same time. So I was trying to bring that digital experience into physical to give them an impression of how the experience is gonna work, how it's gonna look like. So even though they weren't in the VR, they were still, it was still a piece they can experience. Also, the audience member who is inside the VR, I think, they were becoming a part of the installation as well. So it was an interesting experiment to just observe this whole interaction from outside as well. So the next project that I was interested was this Multiverse series. This is a further explorations of the forms that I generated for mediated virtuality, that VR installation. So something I explored during that process was I was super inspired to create physical objects, because most of my work is digital. So physical always seemed like, oh, this is a cooler way to do things, you know? So I had that experience. I learned a lot from it. But at the end, something I discovered was the work lives as its documentation, which is generally the photos of the work or the videos of the work, which doesn't really look that different if you have this kind of, if you use these kind of photorealistic rendering techniques. So physical work and digital work doesn't really look that different in digital. Yeah. So that became another area for me to blur these boundaries between digital and physical, because at the end, this is like a you know, magician's work or illusionist work, and I like to fool our perception and senses. That I like that uncanny valley of, oh, is this real? Is this rendering? Is this, what is this? And that's the point for me sometimes, you know, to just play with that perception of objects and things. So I wanted to just bring more motion and limitless sense of scale to these same form ideas, because even though these 3D prints are cool, you can touch it, you know, you can feel it the way we used to, you know, experience things. But in digital space, we don't have material cost, we don't have gravity, we don't have any kind of limitations that we can have in the physical. So I was just freeing my imagination in this series, and I was producing these impossible objects that are doing impossible motions or scales or so it just became another area for me to free my imagination and explore different installation and sculptural ideas. One cool thing about that, I was able to showcase these digital works in different settings and different ways of you know, distributing work for digital artists like me. So Sedition, for instance, became a platform where I was able to present these time-based video works as a collector, as a, you know, for collectors, where they can collect these works in digital platforms, exchange it, and so on. So this was an interesting, another way of exhibiting these kind of works. Collaboration with Depicts became interesting. They were producing these 4K displays. To add to your, by the way, like observation, Vanessa, Depict, I guess, is no more there. You know, that's also interesting. MGM National Harbor had this giant LED screen. It was a 60 feet tall LED screen, wow. I guess. Yeah, working with Obscura Digital again, they licensed some of these content of the Multiverse series, and it became a part of this permanent display. So just, you know, experimenting with these hypothetical installation ideas with limited scale somehow found its real space in the real world, you know, in these screen formats. Also, Hennessy approached me. They were interested in one of these artworks, and it became a part of their global campaign for this product. How are we doing with time right now? I guess, how many minutes do I have?
I mean, you can keep going for a few more minutes if you'd like before we segue
Okay.
into our conversation.
So this was the next project. It was a AR residency with Adobe. We were having these weekly meetings with the Adobe team, and I was bringing this time similar sculptural ideas into the AR space. This was another cool exploration because a lot of people doesn't have VR headsets, or they don't have a chance to go to domes or, you know, these large installations, but everyone have a device where they can experience AR art. So this became another alley for me to explore. At the end, it turned out to be this face tracking installation, because also, again, thinking about how it's going to be presented in the gallery space, I wanted to keep it as minimal as possible, so people are not, you know, walking around with devices, and it doesn't need any assistance. So just face tracking became something interesting. And I received a lot of feedback for my experiences that they were taking people into very meditative spaces. So I became very interested in facilitating that kind of meditative experiences, utilizing this immersive media. And I was already producing these concepts when this company from New York contacted me called Frequency. They were also working on the same idea with domes, creating guided meditation experiences, having these audiovisual setup, also some sort of meditation techniques, breathing techniques, and group exercises where they are exploring human connection. It was a great way to expand my explorations, because that now we have also the personal human-to-human interaction, a group experience in using these digital spaces as well. I've created a few classes with them in New York. Later, when I was in New York in 2019, I worked with ZEROSPACE, which is a big, giant, actually, immersive art museum, where I have created this work called Numenon. This is like a mini retrospective audiovisual installation of mine, which consists of like 4 or 5 of my different audiovisual works under this concept of Numenon, with a new audio piece that I've created. It was currently on view until the pandemic started. And here as well, this became a stage for different kind of events where they have yoga practices in front of this installation and musical performances. And Gabriel Shama, Oakland-based artist, created this laser cut sculpture in this installation as well, which is super detailed when you see it in person. And then I was in Hawaii after these experiences in New York. I gave design classes over there. I worked with Native Hawaiian students, and just photography in that beautiful environment became super inspirational for me. And right now I'm actually producing new works based on these photos, and again, exploring another realm of how to merge the real, digital, and physical realities. Thank you for listening. And like I said, you can see the videos of these works on my website or social accounts.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so much to unpack and to talk about in your work. So maybe let's start with the big picture question. You talk a lot about how there's this movement between architectural space and digital space and natural space for you, and that a lot of your work is really interested in trying to blend or hybridize the virtual with the real. How do you understand that relationship between the virtual and the real? I mean, what is your core kind of artistic philosophy about what you're representing? I mean, one of your works is called noumenon, which is a Kantian term for the thing in itself. Is
Exactly.
that kind of, is it an idealization of the object? Is it something about our cultural moment that you're trying to represent, this kind of slippage between the virtual and the real? When you talk about mathematics, that's ages old, right? These hyper objects. So how do you understand that relationship?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Vanessa. So first of all, noumenon, I think, ideas, the world of ideas, I think the inspiration is coming from there. So art in itself is a practice to turn those abstract ideas into tangible things or experiences, right? So there is that already existing relationship between this hyperspace and the physical space. And I feel like from a different perspective, it is also a reaction. Art is always about how artists are reacting to their time. And right now we are living in a time where we exist actually in different spaces. We have a physical, reality. We have digital representations of ourselves online. We have stream media, this or that, and our devices. Our existence is happening on a different scales right now, simultaneously. I think there's a reaction to that, to maybe finding somehow a more holistic existence, surpassing all those different spaces, so we don't have a fractured maybe identity or perception of things. That might be, I think, like a general theme to explore those relationships between different spaces. And I think there's also a relationship between the relationship between inner realities and external realities, how we express our internal realities by encoding them into language or music or visual arts. So that's also another way to look at art. And I think it's becoming more and more obvious by these digital tools,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what are some kind of concrete ways that these strategies or these tools help you in either realm? Like how do architectural techniques, for example, help you understand and structure space digitally? And how does working in digital space help you understand or work with domes or other kind of actual physical objects?
Mm-hmm. To me, it's like a continuous flow of exploration, and also it's a way to just continue being creative. So it's a creative strategy for me, in addition to being an area of exploration, because when I feel stuck or bored working on a certain media, I can just switch to digital or physical or a different way of producing things, so that I can survive through that lack of inspiration, or like just repeating myself in a certain way of working. But it is it's a great feedback mechanism for me there, because when you have an artifact from either of those worlds, you can translate it into other, and you can look at it under a different light, and you can learn a lot from something tangible, and translate that materiality or that sense of perception into digital space. So when I produce something, despite it is digital and it's not confined by those physical realities, I can still reflect some of that realness in that space. I think that adds up to it, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what's the place of transcendental objects in that world? This is something that you kind of name part of your practice.
Yeah. So the noumenon actually is the same concept, because it describes this object that exists without any human sense or perception. So it is that hypothetical object, maybe that lives in a higher dimension or something like that. And I was also reading books like Expanded Cinema or interested in the ideas of Buckminster Fuller, I was also super inspired by the mavericks of the 70s, like Robert Anton Wilson, Tim Leary, Terence McKenna, all those psychedelic explorers. The term of transcendental object is actually coming from that, because Terence McKenna was saying, you know, all the evolution of human progress or civilization, they are signposts to this object at the end of time, which he calls transcendental objects. So he says all these effort is to bring that object from higher dimensions to this, and it's like the pinnacle of the whole technical or artistic progress. So I was just entertaining myself with that idea, how it can look like, how it can feel like, and so these are also, I guess, some sort of signposts to that thing that is existing in a future reality.
Yeah, it seems like consciousness and testing and stretching consciousness in your work is really important. You know, you had that quote from Expanded Cinema about new consciousness and the way in which art and media art particularly can help with that. I mean, and when you talk about Terence McKenna, obviously he was extremely invested in elevating consciousness. So, you know, and also at the end of your talk, you mentioned a little bit about meditation. So is this something that you think virtual art is kind of uniquely positioned to do?
Yeah. I think so, because it is a very, you know, when we're talking about immersive experiences and when we are talking about expanded cinema, it's all about some sort of multi-sensory experience. So we can directly work with the audience's perception, visual perception. For instance, when we're working with, you know, projection installations, having these tricks of light and shadow, it is basically a play with how visual perception works, and we can expand that with, you know, adding different sound experiences or tangible experiences and surrounding people in these digital universes. I think it is a very powerful media to play with that sense of perception and how we perceive our surroundings, or, you know, how our senses and brain is reacting to the differences and changes in that.
Is that something that you found with your audiences?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's like a mutual evolution, you know, because it feels very rewarding. You know, I have an intent when I'm building the experiences with that kind of direction, but I don't necessarily say people like, this is a, you know, this kind of meditation experience where you need to feel this or that. So it's up to the audiences, but I've been receiving feedback like, oh, like I found myself in a place that I find myself when I meditate, and I'm in like 40 minutes in or something like that. So when people can travel to that space and find themselves there in like 4 minutes of this digital experience, I think it is very powerful. So when I received that kind of feedback and found myself in those deep conversations, I just naturally evolved my work toward more of that meditative direction, I guess.
That's really interesting. And it seems to me to really resonate with some of the folks who have inspired your work. You talk about Bucky Fuller, you talk about Terence McKenna, Gene Youngblood. There's this real strand of, it strikes me as the utopian, which is an interesting counterpoint to how a lot of people talk about the virtual now as being, in many ways, potentially really toxic and synthetic, and kind of sustaining relationships and conversations that may not be so healing. So how, I mean, is the utopian an explicit frame for how you approach your work?
I'm not sure if I feel that way anymore, to be honest, but, you know, like growing up, you know, we have that rebellious, you know, attitude toward life, and, you know, where we have all these ideals, and I think it mostly finds its reflection, its representation in the visual aesthetics way, and maybe also how I uh, describe my work. Uh, um, and I find that attitude also more hopeful and more, holistic and positive, and it's not dictating a certain type of living or future, but Bucky Fuller's idea of design scientists is a great disciplinary approach to art and design and how to make things, basically. And now we have all these powerful tools and computers and digital fabrication. We can even better utilize all those approaches to build more efficient and sustainable systems and aesthetics and expressions.
So since you're working with and kind of bridging the virtual and the real, what would you describe or consider the materials of your art practice? Like what are the materials that you work with? If a painter works with paint, what is it that you do? What do you do with?
Yeah, I mean, my colleagues mostly say they're working with light and space, and but I feel like at the end, this is a very abstract reality. It's an abstract universe, so the basic material is ideas and thoughts and the code that generates those forms. So I mean, I really appreciate generative processes. So any form I may produce is generally how that process looked like when I rendered it, So it is, I think that process is the material itself somehow.
I think one of my first conversations with you, John, was about emergent processes like the murmuration of birds, for example, these complex phenomena that are at the same time extremely ordered and detailed that you see in the natural world. And since then, just kind of a little parentheses in this conversation, I've encountered so many talented people and some of your colleagues, and I feel sometimes as if everybody had attended the same secret conference, because these fascinations sort of ripple and resonate through this emerging realm of the digital arts and of immersive experiences. People are working with emergent phenomena, and also biomimicry is, for instance, a phrase and a fascination that has emerged. So this reflection of natural processes finding its way into an arena that some people view as synthetic is interesting, and the way that those two worlds that might seem to be so separate from one another begin to overlap. I've noticed.
Yeah. I totally agree. I mean, based on that secret conference, I have the whole calendar of how this whole aesthetics, developed over time. I mean, we all inspired each other, but I know who is inspired by what and how that evolved. But yes, there is this very consistent language and aesthetics in people who are producing this type of art. But for me, I feel like the virtual world we are the explorers of this new virtual world, and we are finding a new language or expression in that world, which doesn't have to look exactly like the physical world we are living in, but drawing that inspiration from nature. Everything that finds an appearance in this 3D world has similar processes behind them. A rock and a bird, they're very different existence levels, but actually there are very similar processes if you really dive in deep, in terms of like mathematics and like those emergent processes. We have very similar relationships in nature between different scales of existence. So I find that super inspiring, and we are also using similar principles in softwares when we generate systems or forms or sequences, scenes. So it's fascinating to have the chance to have that novelty in expression. And I don't think it happens all the time, So I'm to be honest, feeling very fortunate to be in that kind of paradigm shift in terms of how creative processes are performed.
When you say it doesn't happen all the time, you're referring to what?
You know, when we look at history, there are really long eras where things were done in similar ways because of technicality or all sorts of reasons. But now we are in a time period where everything is rapidly evolving so fast. So our tools are evolving, our technologies are evolving so fast, and we are reacting to that rapid evolutionary pace with the aesthetics we find.
Got you. Thanks for clarifying. And a question I wanted to make sure we got in before our hour draws to a close. And in a moment, maybe we could talk about your plans to do some work with us in Oakland. That'd be terrific. But to set that up a bit, or just to maybe touch on an inevitable topic, here we are. Vanessa Cheng has nicely phrased it as we have bodies in space, right? And bodies in space have become a problem. So in this time of COVID with social distancing and so on, a lot of the work that you've described in this hour and that we are so interested in is described as immersive. People get together and they're sharing space and able to observe things, sometimes in 360 degrees. That's a literally quite awe-inspiring kind of arts practice. But a question that it begs is art and artists have often been not toward the top of what our society considers to be a priority, urgently in need of funding and attention. The arts are sometimes seen as a luxury or something as peripheral. So my question, if you have a thought about this, is what is it now during this time when I sort of believe that I'm seeing this as even more extreme now, right? Artists are having trouble finding any traction. People seem to have forgotten. There's a temporary amnesia, as we, for very good reasons, need to take care of problems like homelessness, and people's hair is on fire. There's like a lot of us are dealing with personal crises or crises with our work, and so the economy becomes a priority even more than is usual. I think we all understand why attention is being paid to these things, and yet I'm curious about the legacy of the arts as well as its future, which we're so invested in and we love so much, and we find this inspiration, this outlet for our imaginations. What would you say about the importance of that in this time?
Wow, that's a great question, Clark. I think that's an important time for all of us, whatever our professions are, to have some introspection about who we are, what we do, what is necessary really in our daily life and what is not. So when we think about artists, I think it is also a great time to really consider deeply what is really essential to their practice and expression. Is it more about its social benefits of art and exhibiting something in a physical space and a bunch of people are showing up and you are the kind of center, or your ideas are the center of attention? Because there is a lot of people who are drawn to that part of the art practice, I think. And also when you don't have that kind of availability or setting, and in a world where we have all these different platforms now to express our ideas, what is really essential in terms of its materiality or thoughts or people's expression, and can it find its reflection on these digital platforms still as an expression, as a new kind of expression? Or do we need to maybe translate or exercise, understand more of those things in the physical space that is missing right now, so we can translate those values into these VR experiences, or like VR exhibitions or web exhibitions and things like that. And also I think we humankind experience all these wars and illnesses and different times, and somehow we survived and somehow we still do art. And I think we're going to adapt to this, even though maybe it's just it's a temporary situation, or it's going to be here for a while. I think we're going to adapt to it and this is going to hopefully even increase our creativity and expression to find new meanings in our work and, you know, living.
And to carry a legacy forward, would you say? The legacy of this, of imagination and of art and all that's come before.
Exactly, because like you said, I mean, we need food, we need shelter, we need all these, you know, physical necessities, but we are smart, intelligent creatures, so we need content for our minds as well, and art is providing that all the time, whether we are, you know, stuck in our houses or we're able to visit big museums or shows or whatever, but we need something to what do you call it, food for our minds as well, and our art is providing that, and I'm seeing a lot of people, to be honest, although we're kind of depressed right now and it's not really super fun to work, but we can entertain ourselves and keep ourselves busy and you know, find some calmness pursuing our, you know, new ways of creativity within this environment.
And looking forward to the horizon a bit, because there will be a time when it's safe to go out and play again. As we know here at Immersive Arts, and as you, John, know, but maybe not everyone knows, we've been gifted the use of this quite enormous warehouse in West Oakland. And before COVID struck, we were involved with you and are continue to be involved in planning to do an immersive experience in this large warehouse in West Oakland. So before the hour is up here, maybe we could just talk briefly about that sort of work, which we've been talking about as volumetric, actually filling a space with light art. Maybe you could talk just very practically about that. Vanessa asked earlier about the materials you work with. Could you describe the way you imagine that kind of work that we would actually be able to physically walk into and see on all sides of us?
So, you know, on a very practical level, I think it's great that we have a giant warehouse, so we can have the proper amount of people, you know, very spaced out in the space. So that's a good thing. That's a good opportunity. And I think, when we were talking more about depth in this piece, so there is a lot of depth to the concept of depth to explore, you know, in terms of spatialness and in terms of like philosophical views, in terms of the, you know, immersion we can create in that space. And I think when you have that kind of a big space, it feels to me important to benefit from that volume. So working with lights and projected light and having some sort of haze to create this volumetric audiovisual piece where people can experience it safely and have their own personal experience in that volumetric piece and become a part of that. That feels to me like a really fruitful area to explore, you know, in terms of its presentation and also in terms of its conceptual framework.
I noticed sometimes lately in this, in what you could almost see as a movement away from the flat screen, the monitor, the projection onto a wall. One way that we've seen this illusion of moving holograms, which of course don't exist right now in our world. I feel like the creativity of artists like you is to sort of find a way to make that seem real, even if we don't literally have moving holographic technology yet. Are you interested in working with scrims, for example? I see sometimes people are projecting from the rear and also from the front. Sometimes there are multiple screens which are translucent. Is that on your mind as well? Those sorts of tools?
I don't want to give away too much, but there are definitely several ways of generating that illusion, and it's been done very successfully by some of my peers. I would love to, you know, I need to be in the space, to be honest, to explore what would work best, because this type of experiences are definitely very site specific, and you know that's going to be our canvas, that whole three-dimensional space. So I have a few options in mind, but we need some time to experiment, definitely, to see what would definitely work best in
And
that
it is
environment.
hard to keep a secret once it's posted on the internet.
that time is gonna come.
So speaking of time, if anyone has questions among our audience here today, please fire away while we have a few moments. John, it's just been fantastic that you've been able to make time to have these discussions with us. Vanessa Chang, also thank you. I know that everybody's surprisingly busy considering that we're rarely leaving the house these days. So it's been really great to be able to spend this time with you.
Thank you, Clark. Thank you, Vanessa. Likewise, it's been always joy to chat with you guys. Thank you for your invitation and great questions.
Of course.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So if anyone does have any questions, you can pop them into the Q&A box, or should be a little button at the bottom of your screen.
Meanwhile, we can show a graphic if you would like to contribute to John's well-being and his artist practice. 100% of the donations that we take in from this webcast, including when it's shared in future, will go to John for his presentation today via Immersive Arts Alliance. There's our URL, that's our website. You'll see a place in the part of the website which is Small Screens, Big Ideas, where you could donate to John and support him in that way.
Yep, see that there. Okay, well, I don't see any Q&A questions. We did cover a lot of ground, so I'm not too surprised by that. So I guess we can wrap things up then. Oh, wait, we've got a Q&A question. Oh, here you go, from Igor. John, what tools do you use to design and visualize the experiences? Do you do any previs, maybe using game engines?
Yeah, thank you, Igor. I do a lot of previs. Actually, previs is a big part of my work, and I generally have a very clear idea of how the work is going to look like. So that's super beneficial. In terms of game engines, I mostly work with Unity, but I'm also super interested in diving into Unreal Engine as well these days. I use Cinema 4D and Octane rendering for more photorealistic renderings, and different types of tools like MadMapper, for instance, for projection works, and sometimes Touch Designer for more interactive installation. So there's a bunch of tools that I use, but previs is super important. I agree.
Here's another.
Try Notch VFX too.
Yes. It seems super exciting. I'm gonna definitely work with that too.
They should change this from Q&A to Q&A and hot tips.
Question
if you push Control F and
that's great. Cool. All right. Well, if there are no other questions, shall we wrap things up?
Yes, let's adjourn. So good to see you all.
All right, John, Clark, thanks so much. Everyone else, thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.
Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Take care all.
Bye.